Thank you, everybody, for coming in. We've still got more seats up front, and then Andrea, do we have any more chairs? If we need them. So we'll try and pull a few more in the back for folks too. Thank you again for coming. My name is Andy Mountain. I'm with a consultant working with RTD on the Central Rail Extension Mobility Study. We've been kind of getting ourselves going and really kind of hit the ground running here in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So we're really excited to have you guys here. My role really is to make sure that, one, you all are hearing and kind of understanding what the study's about and all that sort of thing, and at the same time helping make sure that your voices are part of the process. So we'll be facilitating that process through. Before we kind of dive into the presentation piece, I did want to recognize a few folks who are here. I believe we've got Director Malpiedi is hiding over on the side there. And then Councilman Brooks, I thought I saw sneak in over on the back there. And then Councilwoman Kanish was here earlier this evening but did need to leave. What I want to do, Tim Baldwin is our consultant project manager who's going to lead us through the quick presentation, and then we'll have some Q&A. But before I have Tim walk you through, I did want to recognize Andy Mutz, who's our project manager with RTD. Andy's been kind of cracking the whip on us since we got going here. He's got good history in the corridor, and he's kind of our chief on this. So there you go. So with that, let me have and the way we want to structure this, again, is really use about 10 minutes here for Tim to provide a high-level overview. I'm figuring maybe 10 to 15 minutes on Q&A, and then what we really want to do is get folks to, many of you are at the issues identification station back there. Very few of you use this one up here. So same exact thing, but our hope is basically from 6:30 to 7 o'clock. That's the primary focus for everybody, where you can help us identify issues from both a short-term implementation plan perspective as well as a long-term vision for the corridor. So, Tim?
Go ahead. All right, we'll move forward. Thanks again for coming. Like Andy said, really appreciate the turnout. It's an unexpected pleasure to have all of you here. We're going to do a really short presentation. Now, a lot of this is information that you may have already seen on the boards, but because of the crowds and not everybody got to see everything, we'll repeat a little bit of it and maybe have a chance to explain a little bit more of it. Our major purpose in this project is to determine the best way to provide a direct rail transit trip between the 38th and Blake Station and downtown Denver without a transfer. That's really the key focus of this project. And obviously 38th and Blake is important because that's where the East Rail Line is going to be, and it's going to be opening in 2016. So finding a way to get people from the East Rail Line into downtown Denver, one-seat ride, no transfer, that's really what we're focused on. And there's been some work done in the past. We're doing a little bit more work now and probably looking at some long-term options too, and we'll explain what those are. Short term, though, we are trying to establish a realistic implementation plan to connect with that East Rail Line when it opens, or as close as to the time it opens as possible. And we'll talk about some of the funding issues that may be involved there, too. Longer term, though, our mission is to help the community, RTD and you, establish a long-term vision for the entire Central Rail Line and how it will ultimately interface with downtown. A variety of options as to how that might happen, and we'll talk about some of those. We've had a project oversight committee that's comprised of RTD, City and County of Denver, Downtown Denver Partnership, and the 5 Points Business District. And we've come up with some initial goals for the project. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but point out some of the key points. Collaborative and transparent. Really wanted to do as much as possible with the involvement and engagement of the community. Close coordination among all the stakeholder groups, and finding some project champions out there for some funding support in the future. Improving overall mobility. This is, in essence, at its core, a transit project. It's a mobility project. Finding that best connection between 38th and Blake, the East Rail Line into downtown, providing access to underserved areas if possible, considering all modes that are realistic, and looking at other kinds of things and how it all fits together, from bicycle and pedestrian connections, all those things acting together to perform a transportation network. This is also important. Placemaking and economic development. Create those opportunities. Find the ways that this project can help encourage those activities, improve connections with downtown, the convention center complex, performing arts complex, finding other things that can make 5 Points a destination, not just a through corridor. Safety and security is very important. Parking is always an issue for all these projects. And finding consistent and mutually beneficial connection to other projects. You've seen some of the other things that are going on in Denver, the Northeast Downtown Next Steps Plan, the Blake station design, all those things working together, including what's going on in downtown. We've got to remember that downtown's a key partner in all this too. So making that all fit together, short-term and long-term, are the key goals that we looked at. FasTracks program included this connection in its plan that was voted on by the voters in 2004. Let's take a little step back though. 1994, the Central Rail Line opened, first light rail line in Denver, including the line out here on Welton. 2004, the voters approved by a large margin the FasTracks plan that included this Central Rail extension in its funding and in its planning. In 2010, RTD conducted an environmental evaluation, and we use the term EE. We use a lot of planning jargon sometimes, so if there's anything that you don't understand that I say, just let us know. But it did provide a program for this Central Rail extension, and some of the boards over there show how it works. Basically, having a light rail vehicle operating in mixed traffic from 30th and Blake down to 30th and Downing, and then interacting into the existing light rail infrastructure in Welton and going into downtown. The Northeast Downtown Neighborhoods Plan, though, came along a couple of years later, along with the 5 Points Business District Plan and a 5 Point Streetcar Coordination Plan. All those things expressed and reflected a community desirability to look at the option of a streetcar instead of light rail. And we'll talk about some of those differences in a minute. We have a video running over in the corner, if you didn't get a chance to see it, that shows some of the major differences between streetcar and light rail. And we can certainly talk in more detail about that. Don't want to get too hung up on that, but the idea is that you do have some options long term for different types of vehicle technology. There's some short-term issues to deal with light rail and longer-term issues that might include a streetcar, but we want to walk through all those and talk through all those with the community and see what those options are long term. And then in 2014, the North Metro Design Build contract has been signed with the regional rail partners. That contract included a provision for the construction of this 1 mile segment from 30th and Downing to 38th and Blake. It included a price for that that's roughly equal to what was in the FasTracks plan. That's the good news. The bad news is that there's no identified funding in the FasTracks plan for short-term implementation. There is in longer-term option for funding for this project, but short-term, there's no immediate idea of funding, and we can talk about how that operates in a minute. But the issue is that if there are ways that we as a community can find ways to fund this extension sooner rather than later, that's what we're going to try and do. And as I mentioned, the idea is to open this line as closely to the opening of the East Rail Line as possible in 2016. And then we started this study this year, the Central Rail Mobility Extension Study, to give people an opportunity to hear some of these issues and talk about them and provide their input into it. So the preferred alternative, as I mentioned, provides a street-running light rail option. This came out of the EE, the environmental evaluation I mentioned, in Downing Street, running from 30th and Blake down to 30th and Downing, and then intersecting with the existing light rail infrastructure that's out there now and going into downtown. And there was issues about moving into using the downtown loop. You know, there's a one-way loop of light rail operating on California and Stout that funnels the trains in and out of downtown. And the EE looked at that issue, and there was some initial concern as to whether or not it would be able to absorb an additional line coming from the Central Rail extension. So we're going to look at that and see what those issues are. And we're going to look at alignments. We're going to look at short-term alignments and long-term alignments. As I said, our goal is to look at that short-term interaction with that downtown loop. But one thing we've asked for your input tonight is, what are some other options for future expansion into downtown? Again, I mentioned that downtown transportation network. This is a chance to start thinking about how that all works together and how it fits together over the long term. We are looking at vehicle options, as I mentioned, light rail and modern streetcar. And again, I want to use the term modern streetcar like you see in Portland and Seattle and Tacoma and other places that are building them. Not like the old historic trolleys, but these are somewhat similar to light rail, and we'll talk about some of the differences and similarities in a minute. And then operations. What are the station locations we can talk about? There are some identified in the EE on Downing Street already. As we move into other alignments downtown, or some options, are there other stations we should add to the mix? We're going to look at those too. How can you use the existing tracks? How much of the existing light rail infrastructure out there is used? Do you think about changing that here or downtown? Do you add new infrastructure? Ridership capacity. RTD did some initial ridership forecast for this line as part of the EE or immediately thereafter. Very good ridership numbers. Again, you've got a lot of people getting off the East Rail line and coming into downtown. It's sort of a reliever. It means that people don't have to go all the way down to Union Station and then distribute through downtown. If they want to go to the east side of downtown, they could use this alignment to do that and have better access to this part of downtown as opposed to the area on the west side near DUS. So again, that idea, no transfers once you get off the East Rail line. That's the whole point of this project. So what are those options using the existing downtown loop, a new alignment? What are the traffic impacts? We're going to do some traffic analysis, some VSIM modeling for those of you who know the terminology to see how this line would interact with traffic both downtown and in the northeast area. How to handle future capacity needs. What activity centers to connect. Again, we've asked you for your ideas as to other places that this line might connect with in the future in long-range expansion. We've got to talk about costs. We've got to talk about relationship to the North Metro contract, funding options to meet those shortfalls or to provide a short-term construction option, and again, that light rail streetcar dichotomy. Real quick, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but again, just to sort of point out some of the issues between light rail and streetcar. Light rail has been operating in Denver for almost 20 years. People are familiar with it. The infrastructure is there. People know what it looks like, how it operates. It's got, you know, those larger profile vehicles. It does require a step up to board and high blocks at stations for ADA access. It compared to streetcar is a little more costly in general, but not always. It has very similar construction costs depending on the methodology. The stations are a little more expensive than streetcar, for example, because streetcar is designed to be low floor, multi-door boarding, and you don't need those high blocks at the end of each station. A little bit higher per vehicle cost for light rail, a little bit lower per vehicle cost for streetcar, but there aren't huge differences between the two. I think the biggest difference is that low floor boarding versus high floor boarding. And RTD has already invested in that high floor boarding concept in the short term. They've already procured some of the vehicles that would be used on this system. And the one big issue is that light rail can obviously use the existing maintenance facilities that are out there now. If indeed this project ever converted to a streetcar option, we'd have to figure out how to maintain them, find a place to maintain them, find a maintenance facility, and that's a cost issue we've got to deal with also. So other big issues, typically light rail does not share lanes with traffic, although again in this application up Downing Street, the EE does propose that it share traffic lanes for that short 1 mile segment. Modern streetcars generally do share lanes with traffic, but it can operate in an exclusive environment also. I guess the point is there's not a lot of difference in how these operate. It's more perception. The streetcar vehicles are a little bit narrower, a little bit shorter profile, mainly because of that low floor boarding. But in general, they operate very similarly. So I don't want to spend too much time in trying to find the differences between the two, but it is an option that we want to consider and talk about, and certainly want to hear your ideas about that, both short-term and long-term. So what are we doing? We're in this initial alternatives development phase, getting public input, getting input from our elected officials like our board directors and our city council members. In the next 2 to 3 months, we'll be looking at some of these alternatives, both for long-term vision plan and short-term implementation. Recommend a preferred alternative, again, for short-term and long-term, and then by July, September, come to some agreement on a path forward. Maybe have some better idea by then about funding options that might be available out there, have a better idea how that North Metro contract might interact with the construction of this alignment. 3 sets of public meetings. This one tonight, obviously, one in that May timeframe and one toward the end of the project, August, September, so you can review the final recommendations. We do have a community task force that meets a little more frequently than that, made up of our elected officials, representatives, our neighborhood organizations, other people who are advocacy groups to sort of provide some guidance to the project on a regular basis. But the public meetings are just as important, so certainly your guidance and comments on this is very important tonight. There is the website, if you go to the RTD FasTracks.com website and click on the Central Rail extension, we'll start providing materials as they're produced. For example, copies of this presentation will be there, and there's a comment opportunity there too that you can provide your comments to us at all times. So that's a pretty quick rundown of things, and I guess we would just sort of, how much time are we allotting for questions?
I think we found the two fastest talkers in the room to be presenting. So I will do my best to slow down.
All right.
So
you said I only had 10 minutes.
There you go. And so why don't we, what we're hoping to do is actually, if folks want to line, I just want to make sure folks can hear questions as they're coming up and all that. So if you do have some questions and all that, feel free to line up behind the microphone here. Before we do that, though, just a couple things to draw your attention to. One is those task force members, a number of them are here tonight, and they were with us just 2 weeks ago tonight or so. So those of you, just to put you on the spot, task force members, you guys want to just do a quick, just so folks see. And again, these are folks from the neighborhood organizations, the business district, et cetera. And there are others, obviously, not here tonight that have been participating and will continue to do so. The other thing that I do want to make sure everybody does have on their radar, it's easy in a room like this to get distracted by everything that's in here and forget what's out there. We intentionally are forcing you to walk through our public comment station before you leave. So I would encourage you on your way out to make sure you stop there. We've got questions on priorities, short-term and long-term, that are really going to help shape the alternatives that we develop, the analysis that's done, and all of that sort of thing. So do be sure to take a moment to either sit down at the computers or just hand write on the forms, and we'll get them in the system so that we can track all that sort of information. And then after the Q&A, obviously, we'll open the issue stations here. So who's going to be my first guinea pig? Come on up.
Hi. I am so happy that light rail is here. It's been a huge asset to Colorado. The only thing that I didn't see up on your little list of things up there is safety. I'm looking at this right now. You're going to have ideas about bringing something from 38th and Blake to the 30th and Downing station. I'm so glad that I'm here tonight because I'm actually seeing the light rail people, and 30th and Downing is a huge, huge problem with safety. And I can't imagine adding these great things and continuing to have the crime problems. I'm sorry, that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, I think that's one we heard from our policy advisory committee as well, that thought of and differentiate between security and safety. And I think we're thinking of it as kind of station security and all that, and that's something obviously RTD's been working with the city and all that on it, and we'll continue to do so. I don't know if Andy, you wanted to add anything to that.
Oh, one of the opportunities here. One of the opportunities with this project is we're going to be taking a look at the design of the 30th and Downing stations, since we're going to be bringing a new train to that area. So it's a matter of being able to take a look at the physical setting and how that relates to the crime issue. We're always working with the Denver Police Department. We have a very strong security department. So we probably have some policy things to take a look at, but it is an opportunity with a project like this to take a look at that issue in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Andy. Ernest.
Well, my concern is on the streetcars, what happens when we have a big snowstorm? I mean, a higher profile, and also the issue of sharing the lane with traffic. It seems like you're negating the benefits of having light rail if you got to share transportation over the same road.
Mm-hmm. Tim, Andy, you guys want to talk a little bit about the concept again of kind of shared travel lanes with the rail investment?
Yeah, is it possible to get
that
one slide back up there? But we went through the environmental evaluation back in, I think it's 2009, and finished up in 2010. And with that, we did basic engineering, and there was a strong public process with that. hopefully some of you folks were involved with that. Maybe there's some new folks in the neighborhood that weren't involved in that. And we went through that process with the City of Denver and the Traffic Department. And what we identified was the train operating in the traffic lane with a turn lane in the middle. So we've done basic engineering at this point. We haven't gone through the process of really studying and identifying traffic light, intersection traffic light changes and those types of things. We recognize it's an issue. We recognize we have to work in more detail with the City of Denver. But what we've gone through, the process we've gone through, we think it's something that's going to work and won't be a negative for the neighborhood and traffic patterns.
And I think one of the other things we were talking about a few weeks ago with the task force was during that environmental evaluation study 4+ years ago, I believe they did look at potential dedicated guideways, is what they call it when the train's on its own. And what you'd be basically looking at would be having to go in and acquire a mile of homes on one side of Downing Street in order to get that dedicated guideway. And that's where in the environmental study, the benefits just didn't outweigh the impacts.
That's correct.
Yep. You want to?
Hi, I only live a block away from Downing, so I drive up and down Downing all the time. I'm very excited about light rail. I feel like it's going to be a huge benefit to me and my family personally. I guess what I'm having a hard time envisioning is having 2 rail lines on either side of Downing, and as I go up and down the street, I'm wondering where this rail line is going to go. It doesn't look like there's a lot of real estate to accommodate that. So my one comment and request is that as you're moving through your study and identifying these types of things, if you could make that information as transparent as possible, where you're going to put the your stops and that sort of thing. I think that would be really beneficial to us as far as where we're going to see these things and how we can accommodate that as we welcome light rail into our community.
It's a great comment. Thank you.
And this study will touch on that a bit. Once we get into the final design of the project, again, we're going to have a round of a public outreach as we go through the final design process. Right now, stations are planned at 33rd and 35th. But again, the trains will be running in the street, basically adjacent to the curb.
And we can't assume that there's going to be some differences as far as buildings knocked down or clearing of areas. I mean, I see open and vacant areas, but I'm only able to suspect that maybe it'll go there or maybe it'll go here.
We're not taking any real estate with this project. We're not taking any buildings out, and that was what Andy alluded to earlier. Why we're in the street is because we did not want to take any right away.
And I think the challenge there, I found it helpful on these sorts of projects to think through, oftentimes the actual public right-of-way is wider than just the curb to curb with the street that's there and all of that. So I presume kind of the design here with the parking lane as well as the travel lanes and all of that, you may get into some of the unused public right-of-way right now. Is that
that's
fair to say?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Eugene?
I wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight. This is a great and exciting opportunity for the city. My question is regarding the potential options between light rail and streetcar. Having been through another exercise similar to this one in another part of the city, I know at that time the streetcar option was highly desired by a considerable number of individuals. Is this an opportunity, or should we think about this as an opportunity to introduce the modern streetcar into our system, thinking that it could potentially grow and become a part of either Colfax or 38th Avenue and other potential expansion opportunities in the future?
Sure. Andy, you want to talk about how we're thinking about streetcar within this?
Yeah, we are thinking about streetcar. It's going to be a major component of this study. As we've talked about quite a bit, it's probably more of a long-term vision versus the short-term vision. The FasTracks program identified light rail as the technology for this Central Rail extension. We've already bought 3 light rail vehicles for this project. It's already come out of the project budget. There's a potential that we may need more just because of ridership and capacity issues, but we've already purchased 3 light rail vehicles for this project. And I think streetcar is going to be that thing that's more of the long-term vision, and hopefully we'll get to that point, identify how we go about making that happen. Yeah, there are some other exciting projects going on in the city where that would make some more sense to start bringing that online. Key thing to note, as we go through this project, I want everybody to understand, streetcar can use light rail tracks as they currently are, so it never has to be a tear out or redo anything like that. So it's a simple conversion just in the technology.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ed, I think you're next.
Eduardo Slattery here. I'm wondering when you made the decision on the tracks being at the curbside, because these cars don't have a steering wheel, and they cannot easily avoid children, for instance. And when you made the decision to go with double track instead of single, because it seems to me that in a situation like Downing, you'd be better off with a single track and as far from the kids as possible.
Great. Thanks, Ed. Andy, you want to talk? And I think that, and just so everybody's on the same page, so this graphic is under the project history station as well. So if you guys want to get closer, I know I'm trying to read things up here and I can't read them. So if you want to get closer with this after the Q&A, we can get there. Do you want to talk a little bit about the rationale, kind of pros and cons of single track and all of that with this?
Yeah, you know, and those things, again, those things came about, you know, it's been 5 years. And so again, here's an opportunity, you know, to revisit this project, revisit some of the assumptions. I didn't want to delve too far into Downing Street and start getting into what should we do this, should we do that? But it's a great opportunity to get input. Being curbside, it allows us an opportunity to just have our drop-off right at our stations versus weaving in and out of traffic. So that's one of those things to consider. It's been talked about, why don't we have it in the middle of the street? And you know, that's one of those things that can be looked at, and that's one of those things that will be looked at once we go into our final engineering, once we get to that phase. But a lot of history went into, or a lot of effort went into identifying why we have the double track either side of the street. I admit I wasn't here during that process, so I don't have the complete history of all the public input to that. But from a operation standpoint and, you know, on-time schedule and all that kind of stuff, double track is much better than single track, and it gives us an opportunity to be adjacent to the curb for drop-off and those type of things.
And I think the other thing that I think back, the very first transportation project I ever worked on was the West Quarter Line, which opened last year. And going through having the light rail trains going by Iber Elementary School, and there was a lot of concerns about child safety and all those sorts of things. And what RTD does implement as part of the construction and implementation program is a significant kind of community education program on, you know, living with transit and those sorts of things. So there's an element to it to really help make it real. And I mean, my unbiased personal perspective right now, would I rather trust a professionally trained driver or a texting teenager driving a car that I've got to cross over? We'll go there. So, great. Any other questions before we kind of wrap the Q&A portion here? Sure.
I think this is great, and I really do appreciate how far you've come in your analysis and having it as a one stop from the 38th and Blake all the way to the downtown, instead of having to transfer where you were thinking at the 18th and California to get into that downtown loop. So that's great that you guys have progressed very far there. I guess the question is, given the single track through Welton, the connectivity still is going to be a challenge because you're only running trains up to the airport approximately every 15 minutes. And so timing that when you're in traffic and running it as traffic goes, and making that connection, I mean, at worst you show up 1 minute late, so you're waiting another 15 minutes there, and also when you get to the downtown side. And so I guess the question would be, one, definitely commend you on having that one-stop piece going there. And so yes, definitely keep that, but how are you working on better connectivity, and what are your thoughts with that? Great.
Andy, you want to talk a little about kind of operations, or?
Yeah, a little bit about operations. That's probably one of the biggest parts of this project. You know, getting that one seat ride into downtown, you know, this whole thing came about just due to the capacity issues in downtown. How do we solve that? During the course of talking about that the last couple of years, the whole Welton Street discussion started, and that single track section on Welton is certainly a big issue. Safety on Welton is a big issue. Proximity of trains to buildings on Welton is an issue. So how we're going to do that, that's what we're going to be sifting through over the next few months. Again, the important thing first is how do we make sure we get that one-seat ride into downtown. In the near term, the long term, how do we make this overall system, this whole system, just overall better? And that may take some new infrastructure in downtown. It may take some new infrastructure on Welton Street. Those funds, or the funding for those things, are not part of the FasTracks program. So again, this project will start identifying what those numbers are and where do we get that money.
All right, last call. Ah, there you go, perfect.
Thank you. Appreciate you guys giving us all this opportunity. In looking at all the diagrams tonight, I just realized that my concern is and once we get into downtown, it looks like you're going to take us off of the rest of the grid of light rail, and that would be my concern, is that we would have to then walk to catch the rest of to get on the rest of the system?
No, we would not be taking it off the grid. At least not. That's not our short-term solution. That's what we're trying to do, is keep you on that grid. There may be some other solutions, such as a passing track we might have to use in order to keep trains running. We're even thinking that there might be an opportunity for a new station downtown that's specific to the central extension. That loop, this guy right here, has its limitations, and that's and that's kind of what initiated this. And we're still trying to use it, but we know that going forward, that yeah, we may take you off that grid. There may be a new alignment that comes into downtown, and that's the whole point of this process. We want to get input as to what that alignment should be, or if it should be there at all. But short term, it's usable. Long term, we have capacity issues. We have some service impacts by adding some more trains to this.
And I guess what I don't understand is, right now the train is going in there and it's making what changes? Why is it not?
Where does that capacity issue come from?
Yeah, why does it not going to work in the future when it's working now?
There's some questions as to whether it works ideally right now. Okay. And what would change is the current D line that runs up to 30th and Downing, that would terminate in downtown. That would come in and loop right back out, whereas the central trains originating here would come in and loop and come back the other way. So that's one of those things that changes. But we're talking about adding 4 trains per hour into that loop that don't exist right now for the central extension, and that's where that capacity issue comes from. And that's where that, we've already had some input. You're going to need to do something different in the future, and that's one aspect of this project, is identify what that is.
And I think one of the things we're really hoping on the maps up here we can get is, as we
Thank you.
Thanks. As we think through that sort of long-term vision piece, if that loop becomes unviable from a long-term perspective, where should that kind of new downtown connection go? So that we've got that long-term vision in place as we're thinking about the near-term implementation standpoint. So that's where, the line you see here, just to orient everyone, that would go into the existing Civic Center station, where the 16th Street Mall shuttle currently terminates, and then where the new circulator that I still don't get the name right of, sorry, Metro ride, thank you, will be terminating as well. But the importance of those connections back into the light rail, that was one that actually came up, Joel and some others at our task force meeting were talking about that. And then obviously other options on how do you begin to kind of, are there other ways? So one of the things we're hoping to see are kind of lines on maps on some of that. So with that, why don't we do this? Let's break the Q&A piece. Again, I would encourage you, this one's going to be the easier one to get to, I can guarantee, based on how many people are already standing back there. And I think Renee could use a breather. So I would encourage you, pop up to this one, pop back to that one. We'll be at all the stations as well. So if any of these graphics sparked another question, definitely get back to the stations. Thanks.